I know it's hard to believe, but you're going to have to trust me. There is nothing to do with my return and Arsenal finally doing stuff in the window. I promise. This is today's Arsenal transfer show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. Thank you so much as always for tuning in. It is greatly appreciated. It is eerie, the timing. I'll be very honest with you. It was pointed out to me many times during yesterday's phone-in show. If you haven't watched that or caught up with yesterday's 2-hour phone-in, make sure you go and give it a listen after today's show. It gives you more listening. It's available on audio platforms as well, of course, for your listening pleasure. But yeah, certainly, it's a little strange how, of course, coming back to action and now Arsenal, of course, very much involved in plenty of transfer action. We're going to talk about that and more in today's show. Before we get on with today's stories, though, thank you to everybody that tuned in to yesterday's episode. First time, of course, back in a couple of weeks, as mentioned. We smashed 1,000 likes. And so, as a result, I think it's probably the right idea for us to kick off the 1K per day like challenge. So if you have not indeed dropped a like on the show already, we try and reach 1,000 likes on every single morning, and we can only do that with your help. So please do drop a like on the video, help us to reach 1K. We're going to try and keep up that run as long as we feasibly can. So please do help us out, and thank you for your kind words and messages yesterday. They are truly all listened to and read, and it is massively appreciated indeed. Right, let's jump though to today's stories. And we kick off with the Arsenal women's team because they themselves are involved in plenty of transfer action today and this week and through the summer. And they are set to sign fullback Taylor Hinds from Liverpool after she, of course, finished her contract with the Merseyside club. It represents, of course, a really strong piece of business by the club who have needed depth in those fullback positions. Emily Fox and Katie McCabe are Arsenal's key starting figures in those two fullback roles mainly. But adding that depth and quality and competition for next season is, of course, we want to see Renee Slegers go on and achieve not just another European title, but hopefully to challenge more successfully across the cup competitions domestically, particularly in the WSL, and to stop from Chelsea dominating once again. So very, very important piece of business by Arsenal and a very shrewd piece of business indeed as well on that front. Moving into the men's game, though, Xabi Alonso has come out to speak on Rodrygo and explain why, of course, he left out the Brazilian international, and he described it as being for technical reasons. Of course, him being left out of their last Club World Cup game sent Arsenal fans into something of a spiral, inspired by the hope that maybe that was a signal that he could be on his way out of the club this summer. But Xabi Alonso said that he has a very key role to play in this Real Madrid side this season. Whether or not, of course, as this summer window travels forward and gets on and matures as we get towards its close, if Rodrygo's situation does appear to be that he is not getting as many minutes, maybe indeed Arsenal will have an opportunity, or other clubs as well, to move for the player. But he's not the only player on Arsenal's radar. Arsenal are said, of course, to have been one of the clubs to inquire about Mohamed Kudus at West Ham United. Nico Williams, while of course, appreciated by the club, looks the most likely anyway to move on his way to Barcelona this summer. There are other players in the fold of the players Arsenal are keen on. Rafael Leao's name has been mentioned, of course, by others and was mentioned in our phone-in show yesterday. But Rodrygo is without a doubt Arsenal's priority when it comes to that wide player, and they are willing to be patient to see if indeed an opportunity does arise to try and get the Brazilian international 24-year-old before the window closes. Benjamin Sesko and, of course, Viktor Gyökeres continue to be the swell of noise and transfer chaotic soup that we know to be over the next fair few weeks, or hopefully days rather than weeks. Sami Mokbel went on to FK's Latte Firm channel yesterday. Fantastic. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, to speak about this situation, and confirmed, of course, what we've been discussing with you all for many, many weeks, that if Arsenal had their choice, it would, of course, be Sesko that they would sign, and that Gyokeres is seen as very much the number 2 option if indeed they cannot agree a deal with Leipzig for the Slovenian international. Talks, of course, are ongoing with both players, And there is hopefully a sense that there will be some major movement or breakthroughs on this fold in the next fortnight. Hopefully, indeed, that does turn out to be the case, because if in 14 days' time we're still sitting here in the same situation, I can understand the angst and frustration and anxiety, of course, around this scenario. So hopefully we get some more positive news about the centre-forward role in that fortnight, because we could really do with a breakthrough and this particular marquee, a major deal, getting its legs over the line over the next 14 days. The big news, though, of yesterday was that initially we heard Thomas Partey would be set to leave the club after Arsenal had refused to meet the player's wage demands, with Martin Zubimendi arriving at the club this summer to become the new starting number 6. That's why he has been brought in. That's why they've had such long-term interest in the player. You're not spending as much as Arsenal, of course, are spending, close to 60 million on Zubimendi for him to be the backup. Partey would indeed have moved to the bench. And so for a number 2 player in the starting sides to be on well over £200,000 per week, close to £300,000 per week, you would imagine, it just didn't make sense in Arsenal's minds to do such a deal. And therefore, he is leaving, as Arsenal will not be recruiting him for another season or 2. And that meant, of course, then all of a sudden, Arsenal needs to find some way of replacing Thomas Partey, replacing not just him as a player, but of course, with Zubimendi coming in, they'd found their number 1. They'd found the player that was going to be the starting figure, effectively the replacement for Partey in the starting 11. But with Jorginho leaving the club as well in the same summer, they'd not just lost their backup option in Jorginho, but replacing that starting figure in Partey. Partey would have become the number 2, of course, in the defensive midfield role for next season. But having lost Partey and Jorginho, they are making quite a significant overhaul of that position by replacing both players in the same window. And they had to act quickly. And we know Arsenal, they don't move quickly, do they? They never move quickly. It's a continuous complaint from Arsenal supporters that we're slow, cumbersome, that we don't react and respond in a way that we would like them to. They're not proactive, they're reactive, and they aren't good enough when it comes to getting deals done. Well, in less than 24 hours, Arsenal have agreed a deal with Brentford to sign Christian Norgaard for what is expected to be a deal in the region of £10 million plus £5 million in add-ons. An incredibly financially shrewd piece of business, of course, by Arsenal. And they're moving swiftly in the market, which is obviously very, very impressive and important to see. Now, it's thought that Mikel Arteta is the driving force behind the decision to sign Christian Norgaard. We know, of course, from plenty of outlets, including Sammy Motley, of course, of the BBC, reporting that Lucien Agume of Sevilla was also another name considered on Arsenal's list. But instead, the preference is to sign a player with Premier League experience, a player that can come in and have an immediate impact in the team and not need that settling period in the league that many players, of course, do, especially of a much younger age like Lucien Agume is at 31. I know there's plenty of people that are asking the questions as to why, of course, Arsenal have made the move for Norgaard over, say, a 23-year-old. But when it comes to that position, and with Martin Zubimendi expected to play the majority, if not all, of course, of those games for Arsenal in the number 6, when push comes to shove and we need to make sure that we're starting our best team, Zubimendi is going to play those fixtures. When, of course, we look at the injury history of the Spaniard, it's exceptional. In fact, in 24-25, he didn't miss any games through injury. 23-24, he only missed a handful. And when you go back through the rest of his injury history for a 26-year-old, it's pretty much unblemished, which is obviously a really good sign, touch wood, for Arsenal. For Christian Norgaard, as well, a player that's played well over 70 Premier League games, well over 80 Premier League games, actually, in the last 3 seasons. His availability is also very impressive as well. And having 2 players that, of course, you can rely upon to be available is important. And I don't think this is, of course, a long-term signing for the club. They would have signed Partey up to a contract extension with no transfer fee attached. Of course, the wages would have been significantly more than what Arsenal will be paying Christian Norgaard per week. But financially, it just didn't make sense to have a player in having that kind of wage when not being a starting player in the squad. They offered him a contract extension, of course, with the same, we expect or believe it to be the same wage that he was already on. That was turned down. There were some further interesting reports, of course, that Arsenal were supposedly more keen on keeping Jorginho over Partey to be the number 2 behind Zubimendi for the foreseeable future, and to look at signing a midfielder perhaps in 2026 or 2027. And of course, maybe even to see kind of the development of some of the younger players in those roles, maybe the production of Miles Lewis-Skelly as a midfielder. We don't know. I don't expect that to happen, but you can't rule it out either. But I think with this kind of short-term deal, Arsenal bringing in a player that can have an immediate impact in the squad. And I know that there are doubts about this deal. I know there's been a lot of division in kind of opinions on this. But when you break it down, you kind of look into the profile of the player. It's, for me, it's unwarranted. You know, there is really some impressive data when it comes to Christian Nørgaard, and you can see, of course, why he's considered to be one of the most underrated players in the Premier League midfield over the last few seasons. He's been absolutely critical to a Brentford side that are excellent when it comes to speedy transitions. And if there's been a complaint that we have had about Arsenal, is that we've complained quite a lot that we aren't quick enough when it comes to moving the ball from the defensive third to the attacking third. And Brentford are arguably in the Premier League, besides Liverpool, the most impressive team when it comes to that transition from the defensive third to the attacking third, and Norgaard, being at the fulcrum and the defensive midfield of that role, is in charge of that connection between those two areas of the field. You can see from this graph produced by the Football Economist that in terms of his destroying ability against progressive passing distance and touches, destroying, for those that don't know, is more to do with kind of duels and winning those key battles defensively. He's ranking exceptionally highly. In fact, he ranks slightly higher than that of Martin Zubimendi as well, which is quite a telling fact in this case as well. So again, it's just further context, as is this when you look at the comparison with the strengths that Arsenal are getting to, say, Thomas Partey. If you look at the graph, if you're listening on audio platforms, you might want to hop over to YouTube just to see the benefit of this, but produced by Kimo on X. You can have a look at kind of these key stats in terms of tackles and defensive third, tackles, dribblers tackled, interceptions, shots being blocked, clearances, percentage of aerial duels being won, the number of errors being made. Norgaard is coming out above Thomas Partey. And when you actually have a look and you delve deeper, and I know that the obvious kind of retort to this is, well, Brentford obviously defend more than Arsenal, don't they? So obviously his stats are going to be far greater. Well, when you actually break down the statistics of the number of times that Brentford players are tackling compared to Arsenal players, they're producing on average only 1 or 2 more than Arsenal players are on average throughout games. It's not a great difference between the amount of defending that Arsenal are doing compared to what Brentford are doing. Brentford are not doing loads more defending, where comparatively, when you look at passing, that is something that Arsenal are doing a hell of a lot more than Brentford. In fact, when you look at the statistics, Arsenal are passing on average or attempting around 100 more passes a game than Brentford do. They are completing around 80 more passes per game than what Brentford do. So when it comes to kind of in possession, the metrics in terms of passing are obviously going to lead and be slightly boosted by that compared to what Brentford are. But when it comes to defensive contributions, actually the gap between Arsenal and Brentford is not too great. So that's what's kind of important about the context around the numbers as well. And just having a kind of look also across their FB ref profiles, comparing Norgaard to both Partey and Jorginho. You can see, I mean, in particular, just have a look at the numbers between Jorginho and Norgaard. Yes, that passing element, of course, of Jorginho is his strongest asset. But when Arsenal want to bring in a player, of course, to be a finisher in a game to help Arsenal see out victories, those defensive numbers dwarf that of Jorginho. And that's, of course, shown. Not only that, but the actual contribution in the offensive third for a player in his position. You know, he can contribute goals. He can be a threat from those set pieces. And we know that from an Arsenal perspective, even though it shouldn't have counted against Arsenal a couple of years ago when they hosted Brentford at the Emirates that week ahead of the game against Manchester City. But yes, that's also key. And then, of course, the last bit of context in this run is how he's viewed at Brentford. And the view is that, of course, he is a huge loss to this Brentford team. Besotted Brentford, of course, who is part of key supporter group figures at the Bees, says here, arguably the most influential and important player in Brentford's post-war history. Huge boots to fill, if indeed Arsenal buy Norgaard, as widely tipped. Brentford fan Jimmy tweeting 11 million for our most influential player. Why on earth would we do that? And Transfer Checker, of course, a very largely followed account on social media, well over 200,000 followers, who is also a Brentford fan, tweeting, Arsenal, if you are not familiar with Christian Norgaard, you are signing one of the most consistent, influential midfielders in the league for just under 10 million. Tough to see him go at that price, but won't begrudge him his last chance at Champions League football. The sense that Arsenal are signing a very good player is there to see. The numbers are there. The views are there. The opinions of those that have watched him for years are there. Arsenal are stronger next season with Zubimendi and Norgaard than they are with Partey and Jorginho going into next season. The data supports it. The view supports it. It's obvious. And Arsenal have improved their midfield going into next season, which is obviously a very, very impressive thing to say, which is good news. And I'm very much looking for it. Now, there is a slight thing. You may remember that we did shows on the channel back in 2022, 2023. Norgaard's been a player, of course, on my radar for quite some time. And I've been frustrated that he's been in some ways locked at Brentford. Brentford have had absolutely no interest in selling Norgaard at all during their years in the Premier League. There's been inquiries. There's been approaches made to Norgaard and Brentford, but they have been categorically against the idea of selling him. I remember Profited? Is that the word? Profited? Profited, as in like PH rather than F. The idea, of course, to a few Brentford contacts of mine over the last few years of why they're not, why is Norgaard not taken that step yet? And the answer always was, they're just not selling him. He's just not for sale at any price. In fact, there were some reports earlier this window that Spurs were interested, that Brentford supposedly valued him at around £40 million. But yeah, that's a really, really key piece of business done by Arsenal very, very quickly, which is important as well. Right, let's go to part two. Your reaction to this, your questions, your thoughts and more right after this. Posited. That's the word. Thank you, Dave. When you put something forward. Posited. That was the word I was looking for. Not prophesized, not propheted. Posited. That's the word I was thinking of that I couldn't quite get out in my mind. The high level vocab escaping me this morning. But thank you. Dave, that was the word I was looking for. So yeah, let's get your reaction. Because I know that online yesterday there was quite a lot of varying views. Some people, friends of the channel, Charles Watts, Harry Simeon, not convinced, not particularly enthused by this deal. Others like myself, speaking to Clive yesterday about this, very positive about this potential deal, are happy about this move. So there is a spectrum of response to this deal. I think this, in Arsenal going into next season, having had two 30-plus-year-olds in Partey and Jorginho, going into next season with a player in Norgaard who, for my money, is better than Jorginho and obviously more available, more fit and more ready and more mobile than Jorginho, also better defensively and offensively, just slightly below, in my view, the passing range of Jorginho as well. But you look at some of the moves he's made for Brentford, there's loads to be excited about there. And then, of course, Zubimendi, who I have been saying for some time, I feel is a better, of course, acquisition and starter in this team and suits Arteta's system plenty more, of course, as well, than what Partey did previously. There's no doubt that Arsenal are losing two very important players to their team. It's not, that goes without saying. And it's a very big ask, of course, for those two coming in to fulfill those roles. But we're bringing in two players with the quality and, of course, the experience that we expect to be able to do that. And so it's positioned ourselves very, very well. Let's go up a little bit in the chat then and see some of your thoughts. Inspired Channel says he is not a fancy name and he doesn't cost much, so he therefore must be a crap signing, according to Arsenal fans. Jackie says, morning, Tom. Given that Zubimendi is to be ratified for next year's profit and sustainability regulations, should we not try and get some summer through in this year's PSR? What's your thoughts? I mean, it's not PSR, Jack, that's kind of the main thing, or Jake, sorry, the main issue. It's more so UEFA financial fair play, which doesn't necessarily have to be, these kind of July accounting periods. That is more PSR, but for Arsenal, it's more about other clubs. Real Sociedad in particular would like Zubimendi's sale to be on next year's books, but it's not necessarily a too great of a pressure, for Arsenal. So Arsenal, I expect, will do more deals in July, but and beyond, and of course confirm those deals. But I don't think there's a need to do these things now. There will be more so a need to do it in that next month. Almiral says, Tom, please help me and our fans think Berta is the best thing since sliced bread and then moan about signing. Oh, no, it's Arteta's fault. Well, I think obviously there is a lot of views that Arteta is the driving force behind the deal for Norgaard, because he is. And this is like where we've discussed things in the past. It's not Arteta's job to complete transfers. It's Arteta's job to sign off on them. He has to be behind them. There has to be a unity in the view of who we sign. But it's Andrea Berta, or previously Edu's, job to get those players through the door. That's why this whole thing kind of about, transfers have not been good enough under Arteta, blah, 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 is always a little bit of an odd one, because as we know, Arteta has wanted other players at Arsenal. He's wanted some high-profile talents that have gone on to do big things, like Rafinha as an excellent example. But Arsenal have been unable to sign those players. That's not on Arteta for not being able to sign those players. It's not his job to sign the players. And he wanted Norgaard, and Berta's gone out and got that deal done at what we look at to be an exceptional price for Christian Norgaard, of course, as well. So lots to be, as I've said, really positive about. And Berta is moving mad, as they say, and I think we can appreciate what's going on as well. Baz says, hi, Tom. What with Partey winding down, his contract isn't a little bit worrying, but we haven't heard much about Saliba. I don't think so regarding Saliba. It's very calm. Actually, Arsenal are in a good place when it comes to that contract renewal. Talks are going on with Saliba over a brand new contract. So at the moment, things are pretty chill on the Saliba front. Of course, Real Madrid, the reports most recently are that having signed Dean Housen, of course, from Bournemouth, and having already got Raul Asensio at the club, and there's a sense that Ibrahima Konate is a player they might choose to target on a free transfer in the near future. Saliba is not as much of a threat in terms of leaving at this point in time. That could change, of course, in the future, but right now there is, very much a positive feeling around this. Charlie says, people complaining about Partey going are a bit deluded. His age demands, his wage, the fact that he had one good injury-free season. Norgaard is a great option, and Zubi is an even better one. Do love Thomas Partey, though, says Charlie. Phil says, Tom, I'm calling you Captain Sensible. A magnificent piece of business, methinks. It's just a sensible deal for Arsenal to do. There's not much to be made about that. The idea that Arsenal would spend tens of millions replacing Jorginho and Partey when you've already signed Martin Zubimendi to be that Partey replacement is a bit mad. So having the ability to bring in a Premier League proven, ready to go, fit and available Danish international for 10 million plus quid, it's just a no-brainer. I know that people really want kind of the high-profile level signings and your exotic transfers, but it's just a shrewd bit of business by Arsenal. And it's always strange to me that there's kind of not really much take a step back, reflect, see how people spoke about Marino, see how people spoke about Havertz, players, of course, that have just, even though they costed, 10 or 6 times more than what Norgaard is costing, not 10, sorry, 3 or 6 times more than what Norgaard is costing, that even though those players have gone on, of course, to outperform expectation, when it comes to these future transfers, there's still no kind of rope or leverage being given in those regards. Major Lee says, with Partey leaving this summer, could his departure open up space in the wage budget to meet Sesko's reported salary demands? Of course, him leaving and us not giving in to what his demands were over this potential new contract, Partey, is going to help free up funds. But Norgaard will come in for a decent wage, I imagine. He's not going to be on absolute pittance. And of course, you've got players like Zubimendi who also will be on a good wage. You've got the striker, you've got the wide player, you've got potentially a defender who also will be on a decent wage. Kepa, of course, is an experienced goalkeeper. He's not going to be on a pittance either. So, yes, definitely will free up wages, but they may already have been taken up by some of the players that we are bringing in to the team. Ken says, Tom, why are the max resolution of the TTT videos now 720p with such pretty face? I would prefer 4K, or at least 1080. Reason being is because we've moved room. At the moment, the Wi-Fi router is in the other room, so I've had to limit the quality. In the short term, we are getting a Wi-Fi extender for this room, so hopefully we'll be back to the usual HD settings soon. So thanks for your question, Ken. I hope that answers your question. There is, of course, work going on to get the quality of the picture better in the future, but it's just because we are now, there's 2 walls between me and the router, so we're going to get an extender into this room to help to solve that issue. At least I think that's hopefully going to work. Daniel says, I'm a big fan of Harry's channel, but I don't agree with him on the Norgaard stuff. He's exactly the kind of squad player you can give rotation. Hey, look, if everyone had the same opinion, it'd be pretty boring. You know, I don't personally agree with Harry's take, and he doesn't personally agree with mine, and yet somehow we're still friends. It's a mad world, isn't it? You can have a different opinion to someone and still be friends with them. But yeah, exactly. You could be a big fan of somebody's channel. You don't have to agree with it. I know that everybody in this chat box does not agree with everything I say, but you still watch, you listen, you tune in, you join in, and that's what it's about, different opinions. But, you know, it's about having discussions when you've got a different opinion, backing it up with facts, evidence. You know, I feel like we try and do that as much as we can, give context with data and numbers, and, of course, varying opinions and, you know, from people, of course, that have seen more of the player than we have, and I hope that we try and do that. Gary says, it wasn't the wage for me, the sticking point of Partey. Of course, with a 5-year contract, he has played well and been given for 1 season. That's not good enough. He's been available. And that is a really good point. You know, you're not, when you give a contract to a player, you're not giving, and this is obviously what happened with Aubameyang, you have to get into the mindset that you're not giving a contract to the player that they are. You're giving a contract to the player that they will be. And the reality is that, as we've discussed, not just in the last month, but over the last season, despite this being Partey's most available campaign, there have been very obvious signs of decline. The volume of errors that Partey has made, the lack of a progressive passing that has diminished over the last season. Both of those things are very obvious and evident in his game. So when you're looking at the next 2 to 3 years of what we would get from Partey, it is not going to be at the same level that we have seen. Equally, as many have pointed out, we've had 1 or 2 available seasons in 5 years from Partey. His injury record is not good at all. And so you have to sign the player based upon what you're going to get, not by the player that you have had. The reality is that based upon what we've seen from Norgaard over the last 5 years and what we've seen from Partey over the last 5 years and the financial outlay of both potential deals, Arsenal have made the right move here. Jorginho as well, of course, leaving Arsenal, getting Zubimendi and Norgaard. They've got 2 players that are far more available than the 2 that, of course, they previously had. They've got 2 players whose output over the next 2 years looks to be, of course, far greater than that of Partey and Jorginho as well. So that, of course, is also a really, really important thing. Šeško says, Tom, did you forget the Kepa? Here we go. I don't think I needed to include that. We know that he's coming. We know that he's signing. It was already kind of done and dusted. We talked about that yesterday. So yeah, I know we got the here we go, but I don't think it necessarily was a change of what we were expecting. So no, I didn't include it. Tony says Zubimendi and Norgaard are an upgrade because Zubimendi is more progressive than Partey and Norgaard is better defensively than Jorginho. Wesbird says, yesterday, Tom, if honest, I'm honest, a bit underwhelmed, but I can see that it's a clever bit of business, but I still feel that we're in line in depth as it stands. It's imperative that we have the quality needed. I'm not asking people to be delighted with this deal for Norgaard. It's not a deal that is designed to be delightful, to be massively exciting. It's not a deal that is designed to take the roof off. It's a solid deal that just needs to be done. It's a deal that Arsenal necessarily may have not have wanted to do initially. They would have preferred, of course, to keep Partey, it seems, on the same wage. But in fact, it seems that they would have preferred to keep Jorginho as Arsenal's number 2 going into next season as the priority. But of course, that turned out not to be feasible. The next option was Partey. With Partey leaving, they've had to respond. They've had to go into the market. And I think we should be grateful that they've done that both very quickly and secondly, very efficiently, and that in a way that it will not impact the rest of their business. There was always that fear that if we were to lose both Jorginho and Partey this window, as we are seeing, of course, we were going to be in a position where the investment needed to replace those 2 players could have affected what Arsenal were going to be able to do in the forward line. What Arsenal have done is they have done business in a way by, of course, paying slightly more for Zubimendi than the release clause so they can get more favourable terms on that deal and getting a very astute, cheap piece of business done for Norgaard, as it means that they now do not need to worry about that impacting the rest of their business in the defensive areas, in the forward areas, most importantly. And that, of course, with Kepa as well, 5 million quid for a number 2 keeper with the vast amount of experience he has. They are being very astute at getting that business done so that the bigger deals, which are more complicated and take longer to complete, of course, can come later and more successfully as well. We don't want to be able to undermine those deals that are far more key, far more important in this window, like striker, like the wing position, potentially an attacking midfielder as well, by spending too much on a backup keeper, a backup six. We don't want to be in that. And I know that we've used phrases, of course, before, like, we don't need backups, we need competitors. But when you're bringing in a player of Norgaard's quality and level, you're not bringing in, just a backup. You're bringing in a player that can compete, a player that has performed very well in the Premier League over the last 5 seasons, or however many years it is. I think it's 5. I just don't really quite get the outrage of this. I get the doubt. I don't blame people for having doubts. Doubts are fine. It's what makes us human, and we should ask questions. I don't get the outrage. I don't get the anger. I expect it because we're Arsenal fans, but I don't get it. I don't think you can be angry or just utterly and entirely dismissive of this deal, but you can absolutely ask questions. And I don't see anything wrong in asking questions or having some doubts about this. And, I think that will come with the context. Charles said it yesterday. He also didn't think that Jorginho was particularly a great deal and was proven wrong. So, it's that I think is important. Daniel says, wouldn't be surprised if Norgaard starts 15 to 20 games across all tournaments, even if other midfielders stay healthy. It wouldn't surprise me either. Sameep says, now maybe it's time for signing forwards like we signed Norgaard swiftly, maybe, or we'll be keeping waiting until the season starts. It's not waiting. Arsenal aren't waiting at all when it comes to these players. They're being patient and they're talking and they're negotiating, and in particular for the centre forward role, that looks to be the next big move. The striker is what Arsenal want to land before pre-season. I think it was this and kind of the Mail reporting yesterday, of course, what I told you in yesterday's show. Arsenal want to get that deal, of course, done for the centre forward before pre-season. They are being proactive. They are being holistic. They are being astute in how they're doing their business now. They're talking to both potential centre forward targets. It's not like they're talking to one and then we'll have to pivot to another. They are having discussions with both, and the financial, realities of both of those deals will indicate in the end which one the club move for. Twinny says, people just don't watch many Brentford games, probably because 51 of their 114 games for the last 3 seasons have been Saturday 3 p.m. kickoffs. Norgaard has been a good squad player will be a good squad player for us. Very composed. Kari says, Arsenal under our owners have let us down multiple times in windows. The Arsenal deserve Isak. Arteta has taken us to our best shape since 2004. We need to capitalise on our team potential. I mean, we might deserve Isak, but it doesn't mean that you can get him. David Ornstein spoke very bluntly and effectively and efficiently yesterday on the Isak situation, despite those links to Liverpool. He's not going anywhere. So we may deserve him, but doesn't mean that you can get him. Dave says, mega savings on wages alongside Partey having just had a unicorn season in 24-25 makes this a very shrewd piece of business. Cyrus says, to me, the club is doing the right thing and on the right track because all will result to success. Wes says, I'm not angry at all. I totally get it. Josiah says, Zubimendi and Partey is better than him and Norgaard. Yeah, I'm not going to debate that. That's not up for debate. Zubimendi and Partey, as opposed to Zubimendi and Norgaard, is a better pair. That's not up for debate. But Zubimendi and Norgaard is better than Partey and Jorginho for me. And that means that Arsenal this season have a better defensive midfield duo than they had last season going into 25-26. If you're looking at what Partey and Jorginho could give us in 25-26, as opposed to what Zubimendi and Norgaard can give you in 25-26, for me, it's clear that Arsenal have taken a step forward in that defensive midfield partnership and position. Josiah says, only reading positive messages because the things you are saying are so easily shut down. I've just read that, Josiah. So I've not seen a previous comment of yours. I'm just going to scroll up to see if you've left anything else. Here we go. None of our signings are exciting, though, and we haven't won the league in 21 years. They do the bare minimum, and our fans make excuses for it, and we lose and say better luck next season. Well, I mean, Arsenal are competing for the first time in 18 to 21 years. Arsenal have got to the position where we are now competing for the title and in the latter stage of the Champions League for the first time in 2 decades because of the business that we're doing. because of the signings that we're making, because of the sales, the overall of the squad, the overhaul of the team that we've done, Josiah. So, no, and I'm not just reading out comments that agree. In fact, hence reading this out. But we have a lot of people. In fact, there's over 1,500 of you in the chat box at the moment. We get a lot of comments. Don't take it personally. The world does not revolve around just you. Chris says, Tom, not sure if you mentioned it, but did you see the Sesko followed Arsenal, Arteta and Arseblog on Twitter or Instagram yesterday? Did a Sesko follow Arteta and Arseblog? Did he follow Arteta and Arseblog? I know that he followed, or the claim was that he followed Arsenal on Instagram. I didn't know that he followed Arseblog. I really hope that's true. Of course, that means he's definitely signing. That's all that it means. Or apparently his agent did, says Mikey. Hilarious. Brilliant. We love it. This is the transfer window. This is what we live for. This is what we want. This is the type of news that we are going off. It's just absolutely hilarious. So, yeah, look, he's a player that Arsenal are talking to. He's a player that Arsenal are signing. He's a player that Arsenal are trying to sign. He's the player that Arsenal want to sign. Didn't Gyokeres follow some dog security company? It doesn't really mean anything. It's exciting. It's funny. It's great. But ultimately, we sit here and just keep our fingers crossed. Spitey says, I thought exactly the same, that Norgaard would do great coming on as a sub and making sure we seal the defence and retain a lead, which is how we dropped so many points from winning positions last season. It's a really good point. Serkan says, I'd be very happy with Norgaard's transfer if the idea is to set up to go for a talent like Abu Adi in January or next summer, when he turns 18. And this is what I mean. It's a really good point. You're signing Norgaard. You're not committing yourself to a younger player necessarily. And also, your signings of Mendy, who's 26 years of age. Any player in their early 20s or teenage years looking at that signing as a Mendy is going to think, well, why would I sign for Arsenal when you've signed a starter? I'm not going to play enough games at this particular age. You think about Reinders signing for Manchester City. That's because they've got Rodri, who is, of course, reaching those latter stages now of his career. He's already suffered a major ACL injury. It makes sense that Reinders would see a pathway into that Manchester City team when you have Pep Roulette anyway. But for Arsenal to sign like an early 20s number 6, when you've already got 26-year-old Martin Zubimendi, it's a very challenging and also expensive route to go down. So signing a Norgaard while you've got Zubimendi going from 26, 27 to 28, and then you go and sign that defensive. And also think about what happened with Lokonga. We had Partey. We signed a young number 6 in Lokonga at a point in his career where we needed to play regular minutes and play regular games. And he did get exposed to more minutes because of the injuries suffered by Partey. But ultimately, it just didn't work out. And I think that maybe is a lesson that Arsenal have learned from with this Norgaard signing. Instead of going for the Lokonga type deal, they've gone to the Norgaard type deal. And I, for one, I'm happier to see them go down that route. Aditya says, why are we jumping on the train of Berta being so great? I think there are a few years before we could see the fruits of his signings. I think that you have to assess what you are able to. And so far, with a very small sample size, the feedback is good. His approach to transfers is positive. He's proving efficient in getting business done. 3 signings made. Of course, one of those being Zubimendi. There was a lot of work that went into that before Berta arrived, but he was important in getting that deal still completed and over the line. And of course, Arsenal have been able to do that whilst fending off a little late surge from Real Madrid. And then, of course, we've moved efficiently and quickly to bring in 2 key positions that needed to be filled in Kepa and Norgaard. And now they remain in conversations and negotiations for that key centre-forward position, not just with one target, but with both of those targets in Sesko and Gyokeres. And of course, there is hope of a wide player, maybe a defender, who knows, maybe a midfielder between now and the end of the summer. We've got 3 in before June ends. We hope to get another one in at least before pre-season begins, that being the centre-forward. We keep fingers crossed to be the case. And then, of course, there is going to be some patience and I think some awareness about the opportunity around the left winger, particularly that Rodrygo profile, which may be one that takes somewhat longer to get done. But hey, if it gets done, I couldn't care when it gets done, as long as it was to be got done. So I think we have to base it on what, of course, we have already seen. And what we're seeing so far is very positive from Andrea Berta. And this holistic approach to transfers, like I told you a couple of months, is how he does his business, is proving efficient and effective so far. Roy says, Tom, have you heard of Arsenal buying Rafael Leao because he has A, R, E, and L in his name, as does Arsenal? Surely that's proof. I mean, done deal, Roy. It's a done deal, mate. Rafael Leao to Arsenal, confirmed. T-Dog says, did you see Gyökeres to Arsenal bid will be put in by next week? I think that was also claimed by the same account that reported that Arsenal had a bid already turned down. Arsenal haven't bid for Gyökeres, to my knowledge, yet at all officially. So I'd take that with quite a large pinch of salt. Maximius says, Tom, do you think Baleba is a Rice clone or he could be an upgrade on Partey? I would keep this new midfield and go for someone like him as soon as he's on the market. Maybe your views on Baleba versus Agume. Baleba and Agume are two players, of course, I think Arsenal could look to in 2026, 2027. Others, of course, will also emerge from the ether between now and then as well. In the immediate term, signing either of those two players would obviously prove more expensive and challenging to convince them to join when you've already got Zubimendi at the club. So I can see why the short-term option, the win now option, is so many. And I do see the irony. I know there's a lot of fans out there have pointed this out already. The irony that a lot of people are like, don't sign Sesko. We want someone that can give us an immediate impact in Gyökeres. And yet people are asking to go for the younger option over Norgaard. There is, of course, an irony to be seen there, and I get that, and I think that's also worth pointing out as well. Ant says, are certain fans and content creators just mad about this because of the order of signings? If we had done the striker by now, there would be less angst. I think it's a fair point. I think had Arsenal, of course, secured that centre-forward by now, maybe there would be more positive feelings. If Arsenal's deals were done in reverse, Arsenal signing a centre-forward, a wide player, and then later in the window added a backup keeper, a backup centre mid and Zubi. I get that. I get maybe the aesthetics of the window would look better. The sense, the feel around the window would look better. But that's just not how transfers work. The big complicated deals take longer to do. 10 to 15 million pounds for Norgaard, 5 million quid for a release clause of Kepa, a deal that's been in the works for a long time in Zubimendi. These deals can get done faster. But when it comes to those big marquee transfers, they take longer. And I'm sorry, but unless you're just paying what the club want, like Liverpool with Florian Wirtz, for example, which is a huge fee and blowing any other club out of the water, Arsenal aren't willing to do that when it comes to Sesko and Gyökeres because Sesko and Gyökeres are not on the same level of profile as Florian Wirtz. They want to get the best deal feasible for those two players. Wirtz is an Isak type signing. I know he's younger than Isak, but on terms of a profile of a level, Wirtz is considered in that world-class category. Sesko and Gyökeres are not considered yet world-class players. And so you don't want to pay a world-class fee. They could become world-class. There's no doubt about that. They definitely have the potential. Both of them, even though Gyökeres is older, has the potential to be of a world-class level. But right now, you don't want to go over odds and just pay what the clubs are asking for because you've got other business to do. Arsenal might potentially want to try and land a world-class player in a Rodrygo between now and the end of the window, and they would maybe potentially scupper themselves by just paying what those clubs want for those two centre-forwards and then not be able to go for that key player that they also want to go for later on in the window as well. Mark says the problem at Arsenal is Arteta himself, and until he is history, the club is simply trading water. Yes, the man that's put Arsenal back into title relevancy and competition, got Arsenal to a semi-final of the Champions League for the first time in close to 20 years, the first time they've been established title contenders in nearly 2 decades. He's the problem. Jasmine says, Tom, I have a serious question for you. Did Norgaard clear the minimum threshold of being 6 foot tall? Zubimendi is an exception due to his amazing leap ability. A good question. I don't know, actually. He is 6'1". So, yes, he does. He does clear it. You're right. Jasper says there's no talk of an attacking midfield player to compete with Nørgaard. If Saka's injuries, his hamstring again, and Nørgaard isn't performing, we will have a problem. I've asked Arteta myself this question. You may remember I asked him about Fabio Vieira and the fact that they sent him on loan and didn't really replace him. And, of course, what do they have? And he name-checked Max Dowman. Arteta did that. Arteta name-checked Max Dowman when I asked him about the depth behind Nørgaard. So it's something you as a fan, as I as a journalist, absolutely, on the word of the Arsenal manager, have to factor into our thinking when it comes to that position next season. If he's being talked about, you've also got to think about Ethan Nwaneri, of course, his role. If Arsenal keep both Martinelli and Trossard and sign another left winger, Martinelli is shown to be able to play on that right-hand side as well. If you sign Rodrygo, he also has played a lot of right-wing matches for Real Madrid. So it means Nwaneri can become that depth for Odegaard as well. So don't forget about that. I think that's important, of course, to point out. It says, will you be doing tactical breakdowns? Hopefully, yes. I'm hoping to bring you some of those shows around the players that we're going to be getting very, very soon. So that's in the works. Don't worry. We'll get around to some tactical breakdowns. I have said on the show before, I'm less inclined to do the whole, this is their movement, this is how they move, put arrows and circles and X's on a screen, even though I know I've got tactical lines and the logo. I just feel a little bit more conscious. I'm not a tactical analyst. I'm not a coach, but I can speak to people who've watched these players. And I think that gives us the best insight possible. We can look at the data. That gives us the best one possible. Jack says, you now need another microphone stand for Norgaard. Well, the problem with that is that this is a Ruder microphone stand, and Ruder doesn't work in Norgaard, does it? Whereas Rudegaard does work. So, yeah, it doesn't really work, Jack. If there was a mic stand company called Nor, then yeah, sure, it would work. But I love where you're going. I love where you're going with that, and I love that idea. But it's just not a Rudegaard. It's just not. It's just not the same, is it? Anyway, make sure you go and expose yourself to plenty of alternative views. Make sure you go and listen to Harry's show and his thoughts on Nørgaard. They're different to mine, so you can expose yourself to some different opinions. I know that Charles, of course, I'm sure will be posting some content of his own around this deal. You can listen to plenty of other top Arsenal podcasts. Try not to fall into too much of the rage baiting, though. There's no need to be angry about this deal. I think you can probably... You're all mature enough, smart enough to know... what I think is obviously very genuine, and what is less genuine. I think we're all very, we're old enough and ugly enough now to know what is rage baiting and what is just genuine concern, doubts, and positive opinions at the same time. So I think that's very obvious. It's obvious that when you watch Harry's content, his concerns are genuine. They come from a very genuine place, and he's got his doubts about them, whether you agree with them or not. I think it's very obvious to see when people are just angry. And I've seen a lot of that on my social media feed. I haven't watched other YouTube content personally. I watched Harry's video yesterday, but I encourage you to go and watch, and FK's show with Sammy Mockbell as well, which was also very impressive. So give those pieces a watch. I can recommend them, having seen them, but social media is a bit crazy otherwise. So yeah, but I hope this has been enjoyable for you. Help us to get to 1K every single day on the likes. I know I forgot to say that at the start of part 2. I probably should get into a bit more of the rhythm of doing that. But I hope you're enjoying the content being back. I hope you're enjoying the shows. I hope you're enjoying the background. I hope you're enjoying everything to do with Arsenal right now. Let's hope that we can get some positive news on the centre forward front in the coming days and weeks, and we can talk about that to a great extent as well. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in and talking. We really appreciate you listening. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful, and as always, up the Arsenal.